I'm not sick or struck dumb, or don't you know a kick when you see one can't quit? We're not done, we're gonna kick till the next one. Hello, fine people, and welcome to The Kick. This is a theme, scheme, and movie podcast on the Now Playing Network. I am your host, Chance. We're midway through our October series on grand finales and follies, aka the last big swings of major filmmakers. Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis is the inspiration for the series, and today we arrive at its doorstep. Joining me to discuss this allegorical drama about the fate of a city and its wealthiest family, it's everyone's favorite inscrutable billionaire innovator, Bennett Campbell Ferguson. Ben, hello.
Hello. I've never been described as inscrutable, but I'll wear it well.
You're pretty scrutable in a very, endearing way. You're also the founder and editor of your new movie criticism website, Fools Who Dream. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's just thrilling to have it up and running and be writing again. And great to have you on the team as well.
I am excited to contribute something. But you were on the news talking about it. That was awesome.
That was fun. Yeah, I love that show.
And you have a review of Megalopolis up on your site that everyone should go check out.
It was the first review that I wrote for this site, and I think that the universe kind of gifted me with my first two reviews being Megalopolis and Joker Folie à Deux. So it's like, oh, I'm going to get the nice, easy ones to...
Yeah, well, I don't know if you're being sarcastic or not. Those ones seem like real, time to do your job as a critic, sir.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that they're great challenges for a critic because... you can't really, at least I think it's boring to be kind of, pro, con, whatever. I think both of the movies have really fascinating flaws and strengths. So that's a huge, exciting challenge to kind of tackle those in equal measure.
Ben, let's start with something that is not film criticism. I want to talk about the meta-narrative around Megalopolis a little bit. I am taking advantage of the meta-narrative in some ways to do this podcast series about a movie that's, 40 years and the controlling share in a winery in the making, and that is flopping really hard in a financial sense. And does that matter? Who cares? Is that a total failure? Is Francis getting what he wanted out of it anyway, et cetera, et cetera? Do you think a narrative like that helps or harms a movie like Megalopolis?
I think it harms it for the reason an overarching narrative like that harms any movie. And look, I love epic stories about troubled productions. I mean, God knows I've got like 3 books on my shelf about the guys at ILM getting stoned during the making of the first Star Wars. I love that stuff. But at the same time, I also feel that how a movie is made is always the least interesting thing about it. And I do think that Megalopolis is a huge example of this, that take away all the sort of outside things, Francis Ford Coppola spending his own money on it, the people in the art department being kind of whisked out of there and replaced. You burrow through all that, and then there is a fascinating, conflicted, sometimes ugly, sometimes beautiful work of art behind it. And that, for me, is the draw.
So, before we dive all the way in, I'm going to try to synopsize Megalopolis, which I think is maybe a little bit impossible. Certainly not the point of the movie. As I tried to write the synopsis, I was like, oh, this is not a movie where the point is the synopsis at all.
I know what you mean, because when I was writing my review, I got like 3/4 of the way through the review, and I was like, oh my God, I haven't mentioned the love story between Natalie Emmanuel and Adam Driver, and that's arguably the main plot of the film.
And I guess I should say, for anyone for whom Francis Ford Coppola is not a household directing name. I never know who's listening. He is the iconic filmmaker behind the Godfather trilogy, Apocalypse Now, Bram Stoker's Dracula, a key figure in the new Hollywood in the 1970s, changes filmmaking forever, and has had just a whole series of tumultuous rises and falls in his life, much like the Corleone family, much like the Catalina family in this one. Totally bankrupted himself in the early 80s, making One from the Heart and founding his own studio, American Zoetrope, and then came back to critical and commercial acclaim in the 80s and 90s. And then I have a question about this later, but I think for a lot of people, his career doesn't really even exist after 1997 until Megalopolis arrives here. So we'll get into all that, but maybe that was some biographical synopsis. Okay, Megalopolis. What's going on in this movie?
One filmmaker has always been ahead of his time.
Time, stop! Go.
Now, from visionary writer and director Francis Ford Coppola, comes an event nothing can prepare you for.
Imagine today's society as a branch of civilization about to reach a dead end. Is this way we're living the only one that's available to us? My plan is a city that people can dream about.
Megalopolis.
What about those standing in your way?
Power to the people!
Who like it the way it is?
People don't need dreams. People need help now.
Don't let the now destroy the forever.
We're in need of a great debate about the future.
Enjoy the show.
1, 2, 3. Yippee yay.
I would say it is essentially a family drama played out upon the biggest possible, most glimmering backdrop. The Catalina family is the engine of New Rome, which is an imaginary American republic. It's essentially New York City, but thought of as the seat of power for an entire new Roman Empire, aka America. There's Caesar Catalina, played by Adam Driver. He is an architect and an inventor, and bully for him, he has the ability to stop time. And he's a character who's tortured by the death of his first wife, and some people have accused him of being behind her death. People such as the current mayor of New Rome, Mayor Franklin Cicero, played by Giancarlo Esposito. Mayor Cicero's daughter, Julia, is played by Natalie Emmanuel, is a prominent socialite in New Rome who finds herself wanting a more sophisticated, challenging future, and she begins pursuing Caesar as a means of trying to know what he knows and cater a similar relationship to time that he has. And Caesar, we should say, is constantly at odds with her father, the mayor, over the construction of this housing development / an actual new city called Megalopolis, which would be constructed entirely of a utopian element, a chemical element that is Caesar's discovery, called megalon. Also opposed to the construction of Megalopolis would be Caesar's wicked cousin Claudio, played by Shia LaBeouf, who, it bears some mentioning, has no eyebrows and dresses a lot like bad-era Michael Jackson. Their uncle is Hamilton Crassus III, who runs the central bank of New Rome and could not be more of a Trump stand-in if he was played by Jon Voight. Oh, wait, he is. And then this is where I started to falter. I was like, what's the plot of Megalopolis? And I had to write down, it's not really a movie about story. It is, and I know this sounds pretentious, but you got to go with this here. It's a movie about ideas and how the stock of those ideas rises and falls in maddening and magical ways at the whim of those few people in power. Ideas like utopia, generosity, rebellion, marriage, they're not just the themes of this movie. They are what the characters talk about. It's what they debate all movie long as they betray one another, as they strive for dominance, as they strive for happiness untold in their lives, untold in the history of man. They quote Marcus Aurelius, they quote Shakespeare, and they try to inhabit all of the meaning that Francis Ford Coppola has loaded into them, set against the backdrop of that shining city on a hill. Ben, I'm asking everyone, as we get into the movies in this series, grand finale, grand folly, or mix of both? What do you think?
I think it's a grand finale in quite a literal sense. And let me first say that Francis Ford Coppola is 85 years old. I hope he lives to be 100 and makes many more movies. I think that would be wonderful. But if this were to be his last film, it would be kind of fitting because it really feels like a last film. I mean, the main character, he's able to pause time, not turn it back, not turn it forward, not create more of it, just kind of pause it in one moment. And I think there's a certain poignance to that time, keeps on marching forward. Lawrence Fishburne even says it in the movie, you can't beat time and you can't cheat time. And this is very much, I think, the work of a director who knows that he is running out of time. And with the time he has left, he wants to make a movie that is idealistic, is hopeful, that is romantic, that is silly, and I think a really kind of joyous, delightful way. And it's the kind of movie that I think you could only make near the end of your career, and that's part of what's beautiful about it.
Absolutely. It's packed with so much. I think I want to actually start with the silliness. I laughed a lot in the movie, and I'm pretty sure it was intentional.
Well, I want to learn.
And you think 1 year of medical school entitles you to plow through the riches of my Emersonian mind?
Entitles me?
Yes.
Entitles me?
Yes.
Entitles me?
Yes.
You have no idea about me. You think I am nothing? Just a socialite?
No, not nothing, but I reserve my time for people who can think about science and literature and architecture and art. You find me cruel, selfish, and unfeeling? I am. I work without caring what happens to either of us. So go back to the club, bear it all, and stock the kind of people that you enjoy.
Fine. I will.
Come back when you have more time.
When you look at some of the behind-the-scenes stories about the way Coppola would let some of our most talented comedic actors like Aubrey Plaza just write and rewrite their own scenes and personas in the movie. She plays, by the way, Wow Platinum, who begins as a kind of a CNBC a financial correspondent who sits down with Hamilton Crass III and asks things like, what is it like to be so rich? She's having the time of her life in this movie, I would say. But then also, I think he just has a fun time with how silly, even things like creativity look. Like when we go visit Caesar, Adam Driver, and his, in his office, in his palace of innovative ideas, and he's just kind of like hook shotting a basketball back into nowhere, or when he's like coming up with the idea. I can't remember if he's like coming up with the idea, tweaking the Megalopolis idea, but he basically just like has his assistants like climbing on each other. Yeah. And he's just like looking up at them and he's going, no, hold the shape. As though like that is what, Steve Jobs in his garage, like, this is what genius looks like, is some guy being like, no, hold each other up in the air. I think it's meant to be funny a lot of the time. Where do you stand on that?
Oh, I absolutely think so. And I think in particular, the villains of the movie are meant to be funny. Claudio, as you said, played by Shia LaBeouf, and Wow Platinum as well. And I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say that they both die in really funny ways. And Claudio, I think, is very much a Trumpian kind of figure, a sort of pseudo-populist who's looking, for approval from a father figure who's very rich but kind of styles himself as a man of the people. And the way in which he is taken down and is humiliated, literally getting 2 arrows in the buttocks, is just absolutely outrageous. And I think there's something almost Chaplin-esque in there about the way to speak truth to power is to show the ridiculousness of power. And I think that it's telling that the most evil characters in this movie are the ones that we laugh at the hardest. And I think, yes, you're right. That's absolutely by design.
I was fighting with myself throughout the movie. I actually think I wrote it down. Somewhere around in the middle of this movie, I believe it is Hamilton Crassus, John Voight, who now you're telling me is Fred Trump, not Donald.
I do actually think he is kind of a Fred Trump-like figure. Yeah, if Fred Trump had a, as you put it earlier, a kind of Scrooge-like moral awakening.
Hamilton has I believe is it his birthday party? Or is it his engagement party?
Oh, it's his engagement party, yeah.
His engagement party in the middle, which has
his wow of a bride.
With his wow of a bride, which has a concert that we have to talk about a little more, and has, a literal gladiatorial coliseum kind of tableau going on. And it's just pretty much satirical joke after joke after joke about, how bloodthirsty and hypocritical the rich are. And I think I actually wrote down at that point, I'm like, this is like one of the most cynical movies I've ever seen. And then by the end, I would say, again, not to try and give anything away, it's like, this is like one of the most, it's just like daring to hope. And not even really daring, because I don't even think it really cares about the cynicism that it has set up in the middle of the movie. Incredibly idealistic, as you put it earlier. How do you square the cynicism and the idealism?
Well, I think what you just said is spot on, and it's the clash between cynicism and idealism that makes the movie compelling. And the truth is that the idealism wouldn't mean much if the cynicism wasn't there. The movie's about the future, but it's also about right now. It's about the fear of a nuclear apocalypse. It's about the rise of fascism in America. It's about a world that has become so violent and horrible that a 12-year-old can pick up a handgun and attempt to assassinate somebody. And I think that part of the film's power is that it faces all of those awful things head on and says, no, those things exist. And even in the face of those things, we still have hope for the future. And the hopes for the future the movie has, honestly, I think are kind of vague. Because what do we really know about Megalopolis? It's going to have some gardens and iridescent people movers. It looks pretty great, but it's very
mushrooms
mysterious.
Everyone can live in.
Yeah. It's a school city. But then again, that maybe is part of the point that the film's saying, we're not going to tell you what the utopia that we could build will look like. It's up to you to build your Megalopolis. And it may not look like Coppola's.
It has the feeling to me of a movie that could only come from someone who's at the end of a long career of groundbreaking creativity. But also like just someone who's like lived through most of the 20th century and the first 25 years of this century. Like, I think Coppola was born in 1939. I think just to watch history repeat itself and to be part of a movement of artists and just Americans in the 60s and 70s who's just like, the future, it's almost here. Like, we've almost got it. It's almost, within our grasp. And then to see it just ravaged over and over again by Vietnam, which he's told the story of. And, the endless war on terror and crony capitalism and the fact that these familial dynasties are the only kinds of people who seem to like remain in seats of power. And now the era of political violence that we're in now, where it's just like that shining thing, it's almost right there all the time, and instead we repeat the cycles of abuses of power and violence that are as old as Rome. And that may be very, very obvious to say. I mean, that's what he's playing with here. I know that I'm not super familiar with was it the Catalina conspiracy? It was about a coup d'etat in like 63 BC, where people tried to seize power in what I'm now calling old Rome. But yeah, it feels like a man who has tried to stay really, really open to a century of disappointment and still keep hope alive. Does that make sense?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting that this is a movie that has been in the works for decades, and it feels like it. Almost in each individual moment, you can see kind of the expansive influences. I think one of the most powerful and devastating parts of the film is where this Soviet-era satellite comes plummeting down on New Rome. And so traces of the Cold War there, but then the destruction it unleashes is more akin to 9/11. So it's this compendium of almost all the horrors and hopes of Coppola's lifetime, even as it reaches back to even before he's born, and maybe also reaching toward what the world could be after he's gone.
What do you think of the Adam Driver performance? Because it's kind of, I would say it sort of stands alone in the style of acting he's doing compared to what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'd heard before I saw the film some kind of mixed responses to his performance, but I actually think maybe the best performance in the film. And I think if you really look at Adam Driver's career, a lot of his best performances have an element of theatricality to them, whether he's singing Being Alive in Marriage Story to a crowd, or whether he's before a group of students in White Noise giving his Hitler was a mama's boy lecture. And it's interesting how that theatricality comes in Megalopolis, in the big scene where he's up on these catwalks and he's preaching about how great this Megalopolis is going to be. He's wearing a cape, he's covering his face, he's rolling around on the floor. It's so absurd and almost cartoonish. But Adam Driver is one of those guys who can have so much fun with a larger than life performance and also completely commit to the emotional truth of the character. He can do all of that wild stuff, but also be on top of a clock saying, in my utopia, marriage is the most important thing that will be preserved. It's truly a kind of all colors of the rainbow sort of performance, and that's why I dug it.
He's definitely in his Annette zone here.
Yes.
But even Kylo Ren is very theatrical. Blast that
exactly.
ship out of the sky!
Yeah.
He couldn't go any bigger with his spoiled, petulant crown prince thing.
Yes.
There's a little bit of that here as well. Actually, that was one of my big questions. Just one of the many times someone made a proclamation in this movie, and I was just like, "What? Why in this utopia that would seem to solve our republic's housing crisis? Why is marriage the most important thing?"
I guess because he's an old sap like Coppola, and I mean that as a huge compliment.
Because he's also secretly Catholic. That just happened a few times where I remain a little baffled of like he's always talking about like discourse and questioning ideas is how we will arrive at the utopia. And to be honest, like I guess I understand in the world why a healthy discourse is crucial for a progressing society, but I don't know how that was true in this movie. Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do keep coming back to the scene with him and Wow in his apartment at the beginning where he says something like, it's not just about talking about Megalopolis, it's about the need to talk about it. And it's interesting that the movie is so unabashedly pretentious. This is not a film that cares about people potentially saying, oh, it's so kind of snobby or elitist or it's all college talk. The movie is like, no, we're going to double down on that. We're not just going to have discourse. We're going to have discourse about the importance of discourse, which makes me chuckle, but I also kind of have a lot of affection for that.
I guess. Yeah, it's both.
It's expressed in such a silly way, and yet I kind of agree with what he's saying, you know?
You could see that scene unfolding between Francis and Eleanor, R.I.P., his wife.
Yes, yes.
Like, you know, maybe somewhere around like 2001, 25 years into trying to make Megalopolis. And she's like, Francis, you gotta fucking stop talking about trying to make Megalopolis. He's like, no. The most important thing is me talking about Megalopolis. That's how it'll happen 20 more years from now.
Well, we have a dialogue about these things. That basically is a utopia, Chance.
So they tell me. I like a driver performance with like slightly more wrinkles or contrasts, or like it's this but like I think about him in The Last Duel where it's like, oh, he's charming and well spoken and he sweeps into a room, but he's the ultimate piece of shit. That I think I like how he plays with that. And I get that in Kylo Ren too. This performance, he so fills the frame in such a kind of classical, like, you know, believes himself to be Hamlet kind of way, literally quoting Hamlet. That I maybe struggle with like how big and in your face it is for me to see the other dynamics, but they might be there. Anyway, let's talk about another standout performance. Who else you got?
I have to go for the obvious choice and say Aubrey Plaza.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Oh my God. She's basically playing WoW Platinum as a character in Mean Girls.
Sure.
Like, I love it when she's in the elevator with Natalie Emmanuel and just completely out of the blue, she's like, listen, bitch, Crassus is mine. The bank is mine. And I know this will surprise you, but Caesar is mine. And he has been for a long time.
Right out of the burn book.
Listen, you and I ought to have an understanding. You're on my territory now, and you're gonna play by my rules, okay? 1, Crassus is mine. 2, the bank is mine. And 3, and this may come as a little surprise to you, right? Caesar's mine. And he has been for a long time.
I know she said she was kind of inspired by like the absolute moral emptiness of Faye Dunaway's character in Network. This is not an original idea. I have to credit the social media sphere for being like, this is Janet Snakehole, the character that Aubrey Plaza came up with on Parks and Rec, or that her character April came up with, who's just like, you know, a devious widow who's always trying to steal fortunes and has a really long Cruella de Vil cigarette and is like, just like, darling, give me your diamonds. That's a big part of this. But yeah, it's sort of like a deliciously evil. It's kind of like a Roger Moore Bond girl and Bond villain shoved together. It's like it's at that pitch of performance.
I think that's true. Yeah, and she's kind of the epitome of evil, this movie, but in a really lovable way where I kind of feel like in another movie, she would be the hero. I mean, she's an industrious woman who knows what she wants and goes after it to pretty extreme lengths.
Well, I feel like you kind of reversed where I was going to go. I was going to say there in another movie, everyone would be talking about how this is the most offensive character ever rendered. But because it's so clear that it's Aubrey Plaza rendering it of her own accord and it's aligned with her comedic sensibility and is so in your face as to not be mistakable for someone being like, oh, aren't all CNBC Squawk Box reporters just like this, all trying to marry Trump? Because it couldn't possibly be accused of having anything really to do with reality. It's a ton of fucking fun.
It is, yeah. Yeah, and even though she is the antagonist or one of the antagonists, it's impossible not to love her. I mean, when she is standing in the snow in that blue dress and saying to Adam Driver, I'll steal the bank and give it to you. I mean, you're kind of like, dude, take her up on that. That sounds pretty good.
Do you have a favorite allegorical bit in this movie that pertains to the country we live in, the world we live in?
I think we have the same favorite allegorical bit, which
Cool.
is the wedding reception and Vesta Sweetwater, this pop singer, performing a song called My Pledge about her pledge to marry as a virgin.
Yeah.
And all these old millionaires are holding up cue cards, donating ungodly amounts of money to support her virginity pledge. And
yes, when
that image of her is shattered, she reinvents herself as this kind of fire-breathing, liberated celebrity in this sort of punkish way. And not to sound too much like the bleeding heart liberal that I am, but I thought this movie was just such a great satire of capitalism. Like this idea that everything is for sale, right? Like even contradictory things, virginity is for sale, sex appeal is for sale. And the fact that that was all kind of encapsulated in this one surreal wedding reception / concert / chariot race / wrestling match. I thought, God, what a bravura set piece. I think it's really the greatest sequence in the whole film.
I'm 100% with you. Yeah, I feel like when his allegory doesn't work as well for me, it's when it gets a little lazy or is not heightened enough, where all of a sudden, like immediately after there's like a deep fake conspiracy and Vera Sweetwater is disgraced, and immediately like these skinheads in leather jackets with the Confederate flag like run out into the middle of the thing and they're like, we're here, we're gonna do January 6th right now. And it's sort of like, but these, so wait, I'm sorry, there is a Confederate flag? They're in New Rome and the skinheads would look exactly like the skinheads in our, like that just, it wasn't heightened, it wasn't wrapped up in anything, it just sort of like shoved those pieces out on the table. But I would contrast that with how much I love the virginity pledge drive, because that is a heightened version of something you can imagine like a televangelist or Jim Baker having done on TV with just like a little more seriality behind it of just like, won't someone please donate to the marital bed of this young couple kind of thing. And it's like, we've raised $100,000 for them to pledge that they'll never sleep with anyone else. I just thought that seemed like one that Coppola came up with 20 years ago and was just like this kind of like deviant capitalism deviant, like Christian capitalism really spoke to me. I loved that one. You got any more?
Oh gosh, I mean, I keep thinking about just little moments. Like there's a quick shot where the satellite is coming down and about to just obliterate whole swaths of New Rome, and there's a moment where Julia and Caesar are looking out the window, and there's this kind of sense of, oh, we're on a precipice, and there's nothing we can do, and there's something bigger happening here than any of us. And there's something poignant about how the movie captured, I think, how it feels to be in the middle of a kind of massive tragedy that convulses a nation or convulses the world, whether it's 9/11, whether it's COVID, whether it's any number of things. And on top of all that, that great image of, as the satellite is coming down, the silhouettes of people kind of projected on these skyscrapers, like looking up and putting their hands up to kind of cover their faces as nuclear fire rains down. The movie is filled with these things, and maybe this is speaking to the cynicism you're talking about, that are just like so unbelievably sad and devastating and poetic, and you kind of shiver, like, my God, we live in a world with so much pain, and yet we live in a world where a great filmmaker can find a way to express that, and in a weird way, that's kind of a hopeful thing too.
Totally. I do think there is something cynical about the movie in that it feels like it has to focus on monarchy or modern monarchy. Like the common person is basically invisible sufferer silhouetted onto a building in a nuclear explosion in this movie. And I know that part of that is just like how we tell stories. And it's also how Coppola tells stories. It's like the great tyrannical families that shape countries and shape nations. But without sort of giving it the old Game of Thrones criticism of like, where are the common people? There are not any common people in this movie other than pushing up against a chain link fence being like, give me housing.
Yeah. But that's a great point, because, and I really do love this movie, but I think it has a number of things that it gets wrong. And one thing is that, to my mind, this is a deeply elitist film. It is about waiting for a wealthy savior to come and lift us all up, because Caesar is a very deep-pocketed guy himself. I mean, he has Crassus funding his entire Megalopolis, and the rest of us should kind of just apparently stand around passively and wait for the gates to utopia to be opened. And I think that's because, I mean, Francis Ford Coppola, you talked about these dynasties that the movie is reflecting. I mean, the Coppola family is a dynasty in its own right. And I think about the ending of the film, which I find to be quite moving, but also I'm struck by the fact that the Ciceros and the Catalinas are up there on this stage together, and everyone else is down below. I think probably Coppola only knows how to tell the story of the people who are up there on the stage, and you could argue that that's a story he's told in many of his films. I mean, The Godfather, even Bram Stoker's Dracula, maybe a little bit less in the Outsiders, because that's a movie that's dealing with class in a more thoughtful way. But I also don't really like that film, to be honest. I don't think its social commentary feels particularly well thought out or lived in. So I think any artist, even a great artist, is going to be limited by their life experience.
Mm-hmm. It's true, yeah. I mean, I feel like Coppola feels like he's been up on that stage and still is and wants to put on a show for everyone.
Yes.
Yeah. We should talk about that ending just a little bit. Because this movie has a card in the beginning that's like, Megalopolis, a fable. And again, about halfway through the movie, I was like, this is not a fable. What are you talking about? And then 2 hours and 18 minutes later, the way that it wraps up, which, again, people have been dunking on it for, because this is not how you write a traditional story-based screenplay where it's just like, and then, the thing that he'd been working on off screen, it was perfect. Everybody loved it. It's kind of a crazy choice, but I think trying to understand what Coppola is going for and giving some credit to that fabulous title card, he is sort of saying, like, what's maddening is that it is that easy. My wife and I were sitting around with our friend Grace the other night, and Grace kind of made a point of just like, do you ever stop and think about how crazy it is that, we do in 2024 have every technology necessary to live in like an utter utopia, and instead we just have like so much of the same old inequality and barbarism and madness and death drive. And I think that's what Francis is saying. And we could just do Megalopolis. What are we doing?
Yes.
I don't know. What do you make of the fable aspect or lack thereof?
A fable is an interesting thing, an interesting term, because I feel like to truly be a fable, there must be sort of like one life lesson that you glean from the story. And
yeah,
I don't know that there is one, but I think what you're saying is really right on the money in terms of the movie is about that it should be this easy. And I think that's quite a poignant line when Mayor Cicero is saying, people need help now, and Caesar says, don't let the now destroy the forever. And I think one of the problems with our country is that we think so much about the now and not enough about the forever. We worry about all these sort of in the moment issues when at the same time, like the climate crisis within our lifetimes could completely get out of control, and we could be drowning in floods and burning in wildfires, and then it wouldn't matter that you got this or that bill passed on a very important issue, because we are so, I think, terrible as a species really at addressing the big issues that are a matter of life and death. And maybe the movie's a bit about that as well.
And I think it's also about how I could go the exact opposite way. I could say, like, why are we dreaming of space? Why are we even talking about Mars when the city of Portland really just needs 40,000 units of affordable housing to fix its housing crisis?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes. That's a fair point.
I think the movie knows all this, because there is a scene where Julia and Caesar and Mayor Cicero and the mayor's wife, played by Catherine Hunter, in a great performance. Catherine Hunter is always just like, oh my God, Catherine Hunter's here. She's speaking in Catherine Hunter voice.
I love that she's randomly having a dance lesson in the living room while Jason Schwartzman is playing the drums too. What a great scene.
Schwartzman is nepo hilarious in this movie. What a great time.
He steals the show by barely doing anything at all. Like, I mean, he's probably literally in the film for like less than a minute total.
But on that catwalk scene that I wish we had another hour to talk about, he's like literally like carrying around like a literal key to the city or something. This movie, the way its symbolism being so comedically heavy-handed really worked for me at times. In the card playing scene with the in-laws, because Caesar and Julia are married at that point. And Mayor Cicero is just like, oh, Julia's got such a great head for quotes. And Julia, do one of your quotes that like backs up my argument. She says this Marcus Aurelius quote that you've seen it twice, but it basically, so you can maybe help. But it's like,
the one about not fantasizing about a world of perfect choices.
Yeah, you'll never have perfect constituents. You have flawed constituents. So like, go do some work. Go do some pavement pounding, knock on some doors, do some grassroots organizing. And Mayor Cicero's like, aha, yes, my daughter, giving me the perfect quote. And she says another Marcus Aurelius quote that really backs up her husband's line of thinking, which is just like, you have to dream wild enough that you are away from the majority. Do you remember, am I right about that one, ish?
Yeah, the one about finding yourself among the ranks of the insane.
That's it, thank you. I'm going to give the bad paraphrase and then you can give the actual quote. And then the third one is essentially about how, like, life will only be as you perceive it or make it in your head. It's not about society at all. Am I somewhere close on that one?
Yeah, I don't remember the third one, but that sounds right. Yeah.
But what she's saying is a person that people love to quote, Marcus Aurelius, presented contradictory quotes, all of which you can live by with people or only within your own head, and you're going to do what you're going to do. And if you're looking for wisdom from one person or one text, you're going to find contradictory wisdom everywhere. And I think you find it in this movie.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You just look at what the film is, and it's contradictory in terms of the different kinds of genres it's mashing up. It's contradictory in terms of its ideas. I mean, in some ways, it's a very progressive film. In some ways, it's a very conservative film. And I think a lot of people, see a film at war with itself, and they're kind of like, no, the mission of art is to kind of present a pure vision where everyone's on the same page. But if I really look at most of my favorite films, they're all films where there is some kind of contradiction, although the contradictions here, I think, are pretty extreme.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A couple more for you, Ben. Neither of the showings that you went to did you have the live person in the theater asking the screen a press conference question, did you?
No, we did. Yes,
you did.
Yeah,
at the opening night when you went to.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
How the hell was that? Please describe.
It was cool. I mean, I think it was my friend Jason Rouse who got up there.
And local
asked
actor.
the question. Yeah, yeah. And so it was really surreal to see the lights come up and see him take the microphone. And I didn't even know if that was going to happen in that screening. So it was actually kind of a surprise. And if I may quote the actor Jared Gilman, who most people probably know from Moonrise Kingdom, he tweeted a screenshot of that moment and said, "Hang it in the Louvre." And I agree, hang it in the Louvre. It was pretty damn cool.
That's awesome. So and for people who don't know, it's like there's a moment in Megalopolis where someone in the theater that you're in is supposed to, as a live actor, ask Caesar Catalina Adam Driver a question at a press conference. And like, what was the question, Ben? Do you remember ish?
I think the question is something about, what if we leap into the future and there is something to be afraid of, which of course Caesar then responds, well, there's nothing to be afraid of if you love or have loved, which I think is an interesting response.
It's sort of murky. I don't know if that's true. Many of us have loved and are still terrified of the future. But that's really cool. Yeah, I went and saw it opening night in IMAX in Bend. It was just like me and like six other, I'll say dudes around our age, all there by themselves, being like, I'm here I'm here in this 300 seat theater on Thursday
the
night.
Mega Bros.
We were unfortunately the Mega Bros. But I do want to talk about that because we got to talk a little bit about what it looks like and possibly the virtue of seeing it on a giant screen. Do you think that IMAX particularly benefits this movie?
I think that this is a movie that feels simultaneously very big and very small because it is quite clearly filmed on sound stages in Georgia. And so there is a certain kind of claustrophobia that comes when you don't, shoot in a real city, when you're trying to construct one instead. But on the other hand, I think it has the power of like some of these old MGM musicals. I almost think of it akin to like the Broadway melody scene in Singin' in the Rain, where you are sort of going into a world that is so deliberately unreal and looking at a skyline that almost feels like a hazy dream of a skyline. That there is, I think, something kind of otherworldly and gorgeous about that. And I do think that you want to see that on a big screen. Even a small moment like Julia looking at Caesar walking up to a flower stand, and the bouquets of flowers are kind of, gleaming eerily brightly in the night. I think it's always more wondrous to experience something like that on a giant screen with a crowd.
I think there's a particular virtue to digitally created unreality like this being on a big screen in 2024, because I would compare it to, like, if you watch a trailer for a Kelly Reichardt movie on YouTube and then you go watch the movie in a theater, I think you would still be like, well, it was so naturalistic, there was so little sheen put on any of it, it looked about the same. I don't think you lost that much. But a movie like this, I think when you watch it, like when the first trailer came out, people were like, is this the visual style of this movie? This looks kind of ridiculous. You almost need a giant screen to, like, let it breathe and let it start to feel real, or else it will, I think, get kind of garbled and cheap and fake looking, like AI made digital effects in any commercial. And I would also say that there are scenes in this movie, like when you walk into the apartment, Caesar and Wow Platinum's apartment in the beginning of the movie, or when Caesar goes to the kind of living mausoleum to visit his wife, where there is so much going on in the production design, whether it's like outfits thrown on the floor, pictures on the shelves, where I was like, I think if I were watching this on a 40-inch screen, I wouldn't be able to see half this stuff. Yeah. And watching it in IMAX, you're like, here's a guy who, just like his lifetime of ideas, is just trying to cram every little totem and visual quirk into this movie that he can put in it. And he needs the space of a 90-foot screen to do that.
I think that's true. Yeah. I think about also the kind of now iconic scene where Caesar and Julia are up on the girders and they start making out, and they're not, behaving like, people who are hundreds of feet up in the air. They don't seem concerned about falling. There aren't like great gusts of wind. They're just kind of, frolicking very romantically on these dangling girders. And I can see how, if you watch that at home, it might come across as sort of anodyne. But when you watch it in a theater, it's kind of like, holy shit, he stopped time and now there's a bouquet of flowers just floating in the air.
I guess we're maybe just talking about, two people who love movie theaters in general. Go to the theater so you'll be into the movie more, damn it. But this one also feels like a case where, like, if you have home barriers to, like, letting this movie happen to you, I think you're not going to like it anywhere near as much. This is a movie where you kind of have to. I almost felt myself like, I think I said this in my silly Letterboxd review, but it's just like the temptation to, like, dunk on how preposterous it is. It's so, you're going to be so close to wanting to do that. I feel like the movie is also almost telling you, like, I know you're going to want to make fun of this, but just get into it. Just sink into it. I feel like that's what the movie is begging for. And I think you want to put yourself in the best position to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, the two different audiences I saw with the movie, they were both laughing at it, during it in a kind of derisive way, but they also applauded at the end.
Oh, there you go.
Which I thought was interesting. And I think that this is a movie where it is kind of daring you to laugh at its ambition and laugh at its sentimentality, but I will take messy ambition and sentimentality over, carefully cultivated irony and coolness any day of the week. I think this movie honestly has what we need more of. I mean, what do we want the future to look like? Do we want it to look like this, or do we want it to look like, God help us, Deadpool and Wolverine?
Okay. Favorite debaucherous quote, Ben? Here we go. I'm gonna do my best line readings. This is Claudio. This is Shia LaBeouf about to have sex with his aunt. Oh, we're gonna work on a term sheet, Auntie Wow. They're plotting to take over the bank. We've got Wow Platinum telling Caesar to relax. She says, "Oh, you're anal as hell. I, on the other hand, am oral as hell." And then we have the quote from Voight from Hamilton, just kind of in passing to his son, saying, "Word has it you're doing the hanky-panky with your sister. If so, stop it." You have a fave, Ben? You want to add any?
I think we're going to work on a term sheet. Anti-wow is pretty priceless.
She's just making him repeat after her. And
Yeah.
after a while, it gets pretty into the minutia of how they're going to take over this bank. But no less sexual in the line delivery.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And by the way, she insists that he call her anti-wow, but she's married to his grandfather. Isn't she technically his grandmother by marriage?
Well, sure, for sure. So Hamilton's not his dad; it's his grandpa.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right, we're gonna work on
I
a term
assume
sheet,
that's just
Granny-in-law.
I assume that's just because they wanted John Voight, and they're like, "Oh, he's too old to be Shia LaBeouf's father."
We're gonna work on a term sheet, step grandma. All right. Truth or trivia, Ben? You know the drill. What do you want to do?
Truth.
Okay. What other filmmaker do you want to see them just go big, put it all on the table in a who gives a damn, except me, way like this?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm tempted to say Terrence Malick, but I feel like that's every movie he makes. So in
Malick's
that
a good
case,
one, though.
Yeah. In that case, I'm gonna say Lana Wachowski.
Oh,
because look, she and Lily have gone their separate ways, and they've obviously had a career with a lot of massive films, some more successful than other. Some of the allegedly unsuccessful ones I actually really like Speed Racer and The Matrix Resurrections. You could almost argue that Resurrections was that for Lana, her sort of ultimate statement about her entire career and her relationship to her early work. But I guess that with her having made, I think, 8 films, 1 solo, 7 with Lily, there's a kind of feeling like, oh, there could be more. There could be another big Wachowski swing in the vein of Cloud Atlas that basically leaves no good idea left on the table. So I kind of want to see that movie.
That's the perfect answer. Because, you need it to be someone who you think would fill the stage with everything they've got, who's shown the tendency to do that before. That's a good one. I'd say Cronenberg.
Oh, yeah.
Every time he we saw Crimes of the Future. Anytime he makes a movie, whether for $10 million or if he ever somehow were to get his hand on a budget this size, he is just going to pack it with every idea he's got. So,
yes.
Well, I think that's all I've got. Ben, do you have any final thoughts on Megalopolis other than everyone should go read your review at Fools Who Dream?
They should. I'll just say what I keep saying to everybody. Like, a lot of people keep coming up to me and saying, even if they haven't seen it, they're like, Megalopolis, I hear that's a train wreck. And I end up in the position of saying, no, really, it really is great. So I would say, though, that if you love it or you hate it, it doesn't really matter. It's a movie that, however you feel, you're going to have great conversations about it. That's a guarantee. And I'll say what I said at the end of my review. This is something kind of rare. It's a movie worth debating, and I think that alone is worthy of celebration.
Well, cheers. Always good to chop it up with you, man. Thanks for the time.
Oh, thank you, Chance.